So this work, like I said, is a real celebration, and we're just really excited to share kind of what we've found, so trauma-informed physical activity, and how that work can just make physical activity more accessible and more meaningful for individuals, and particularly those who have experienced trauma. And what's really novel about this work, and what we're really excited about, is not just what works, it's how that works, and what are those tools that you can implement, and taking into account the context that's working in. So Aku, you're going to hear from Dr Akusile Makawa, who conducted his PhD within this research. And this work has gained international recognition already. So Aku won the People's Choice Award for Rapid Communication at the Global Alliance for Mental Health and Sport Conference, the Games Conference this year. And that just kind of recognises that global relevance to the work and the impact of his work on how we deliver trauma-informed practice. So we are really very proud of Aku. And honestly, it feels like yesterday that Hayley and I and Gemma were interviewing Aku, and it's gone so fast. So as I mentioned, this work is part of a long-standing relationship with Mind. So I think it's 12 years since the Get Set to Go days. And it's just been a real privilege to be able to help Mind shape how they deliver physical activity programs, and just broaden that understanding of how we can be more supportive and create those inclusive environments. So I'm going to hand over to somebody who's literally the most get things done person that I have ever met. So Hayley Jarvis heads up the physical activity, the National Physical Activity portfolio at Mind, and has overseen some really important changes within the sector. So the programme's funded by Sport England, the National Lottery, ASICS, and some of the key kind of sector initiatives, including the Mental Health Charter for Sport and Recreation, the Duty of Care in elite sport, and really heading up some of the major partnerships with, for example, the English Football League. So I'm going to hand over to Hayley, and then Aku will go from there, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So thank you again for joining us. Thanks for those who are joining us online. I think we had 270 people sign up, so plenty of people online as well.
Thanks, Flo. That's quite an introduction. Definitely like to get stuff done. So a huge welcome to everyone today on behalf of Mind. We're thrilled to be here to launch the findings from the trauma-informed physical activity research, and to come together with partners, colleagues and friends in person and online. And it's really important for us. Tomorrow marks 11 years since we launched the Mental Health Charter for Sport and Recreation in partnership with the Sport and Recreation Alliance and the Professional Players Federation. The aim then, as it remains today, was to support the sector to adopt positive mental health practice and to make sport and physical activity more inclusive and open to people with mental health problems. And I think it's fair to say a lot's happened in that time. You know, more than 470 organisations signed up to that charter and have taken steps towards meaningful change. Sport England, who are here today, have continued to invest in mental health, establishing Mind as a system partner, enabling us to really support the sports sector to build mental health understanding and to help the mental health sector to embed physical activity more confidently and intentionally. We proudly also convene colleagues from across mental health charities and peer-led organisations through the Mental Health and Movement Alliance, and really have built a collective voice for this work. So Flo mentioned Get Set to Go, and that's when we first worked together many years ago now, reached over 10,000 people. We've had various peer support programmes helping people to live well and stay well using movement and physical activity. And with the support of partners such as ASICS and Buxton, we've been able to really grow that delivery across our federation of almost 100 local minds. And throughout that journey, we've had the privilege of working side by side with our colleagues at Loughborough University. So not only have they brought academic rigour not only to Get Set to Go, but to also our broader sector support programmes, and have been critical friends and supportive partners alongside colleagues at the Centre for Mental Health, Sport and Physical Activity Research at Edgehill University. So during this time, we've seen more athletes speak about mental health. We've seen the mental health literacy across physical activity providers deepen and mature. The conversation has evolved. When I started, we were simply recognising that we all have mental health, to now exploring the psychosomatic impacts on our bodies and our nervous systems. But we've also seen stubborn inequalities persist within mental health systems and structures. And to respond, Mind has identified priority audiences, including young people who have experienced trauma, racialised communities, and people living in poverty. And in some audience scoping that we found something really important. Whilst the majority of young people who experience trauma enjoy physical activity, around 59%, only 16% of them regularly use it intentionally to support their mental health. And we really wanted to understand that disconnect and to explore what being trauma-informed really means in a physical activity context. That term is widely used but interpreted in so many different ways. So, like many times over the last 11 years, we had a bit of an idea, and who better to help us explore it than our friends at Loughborough and our long-standing partners at ASICS. So since 2021, Mind and ASICS have worked together to harness the power of movement for the mind, funding programmes such as our Get Active connectors, in our local minds, campaigns such as New Personal Best, helping us reframe movement in a more compassionate and inclusive way. And we know that ASICS are deeply committed to supporting research that helps us better understand the relationship between movement and mental health. And so we had an amazing team in place. So a huge thank you to ASICS for investing in this research, and to Loughborough University for bringing it to life with such care and integrity, and to all the friends and partners that supported us along the way. So now it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to Dr Akusile Makawa to share his findings.
Thank you all. Thank you, Hayley and Flo, for the intro, and thank you all for a very warm welcome. So good to see so many of you here in the room, and I know we've got a lot of people joining online as well. So as mentioned, my name is Aku, and I'm going to be talking you through my PhD, which looked at trauma-informed physical activity, supported by ASICS and Mind, but also supervised by Flo, Gemma and Hayley. Thank you all for your support along the last 3.5 years. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you all in this space. So a quick note before we get started then, we're going to be talking today about trauma and mental health difficulties, and as Flo mentioned, we've got a designated room just outside to your right, or your left, where you can go sit down and have a kind of moment to yourself, regain kind of your composure, and then rejoin us if you feel ready to do so. If you don't, that's fine, but that kind of space is there for you to look after your own well-being in this space and time. And a few kind of resources there for you to access if at any point you do need to access them afterwards as well. So I thought I'd start with a bit of background into why we did the PhD in the first place. So the first thing we kind of recognised was that trauma was both pervasive and prevalent, so it affects about 70% of the population globally. But also when we're affected by trauma, we see effects in our mental health, so things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, other clinical kind of diagnoses. We see physical health implications, so things related to being stuck in that fight or flight response for too long, so muscular tension, body aches are often reported as well. And we also see some psychosocial outcomes associated with trauma too, where people have lower levels of self-worth and self-perception, lower levels of self-confidence, but also more likely to experience social isolation. So kind of feeling removed from society, kind of feeling removed from the communities in which they live in, so really kind of feeling those high levels of loneliness as well. So the physical activity sector in more recent years has tried to apply trauma-informed approaches to physical activity program design and delivery, and by that we mean that we're working actively to try and help people who've experienced a range of different traumas. So working in a way that recognises that trauma will affect most of the people in our teams, our classes, but working in a way that says, look, we know that happens, we know that sets a new kind of layer of barriers for you, and we kind of want to help you with that as well, but also want to avoid re-traumatisation, kind of the key thing that we're trying to do there as well. So trauma-informed physical activity is a new and exciting, very rapidly growing kind of area, and one that aims to make sure that physical activity and exercise spaces are appropriate, are accessible, and equitable for people who've experienced a range of traumas. So we see trauma in terms of the big traumas, your interpersonal violence, experiencing refugeeism, but also more systemic traumas as well that we kind of see in our day-to-day lives as well. However, there's still a lot to learn, or definitely there was a lot to learn before we started the PhD, and the kind of core aim for us was to kind of progress this literature base, progress what's understood, but also progress what we can do in terms of trauma-informed physical activity interventions. So the PhD had two core aims. So the first aim was to explore what works for who, in what context and why, and I'll break down that wording later on because that aligns a lot to the approach that we took to conduct the research. The second aim is to generate some recommendations support for facilitators in working in community settings. So by facilitators, we mean, program designers, policy makers, coaches, volunteers, personal trainers, people working across that entire breadth of delivery and design. And I guess the core thing we wanted to do is to make sure that our recommendations are evidence-based, but also based in lived experience as well. So the approach we took to conduct the PhD was a realist inquiry, and I will spend a bit of time talking about what that is in a moment's time. But also this kind of outline provides an outline of what I'll be talking about today's session as well. So we started off by conceptualising TIPA, so what does it mean to be trauma-informed in this space? We then developed a set of program theories, so kind of looking at what works for who and what context and why, and really looking at the mechanisms in these interventions that help us understand the outcomes that we see. So outcomes relating to more social kind of capital, embodiment, those kinds of things as well. And the final step we took was to refine these program theories across 3 case studies as well. So we had the very enjoyable opportunity, the exciting chance to connect with 3 organisations who allowed us to kind of refine our program theories in their interventions. And at the end of this, we've got a set of program theories that should, in practice, kind of relate to different projects, that should kind of capture the experiences and the nuances around the experience of trauma, but also engagement in TIPA interventions. So the first step was to conceptualise trauma-informed physical activity, and to do this, we took a bit of a deep dive into trauma-informed approaches more broadly. So kind of looked at where they originated from, and we found that really they originated in the mental health and the substance misuse literature, where services in these spaces recognise the high prevalence of trauma. I think the statistic is something like 90% of people in these services have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. So these services kind of looked at that and said, right, we need a way of working with these individuals, these communities, that says we understand that trauma occurs, that says that we can actually work with them to avoid re-traumatisation, but also support their kind of trauma recovery as well. So in 2014, SAMHSA combined a range of kind of lived experience examples and resources in terms of literature, and created these 6 principles that you see on the board there. And what these 6 principles represent is, if we're doing trauma-informed work, we must be underpinned by these 6 principles, right? We have to make sure that people feel safe, psychologically and physically, that we work collaboratively and transparently, but also we take into consideration people's cultural, historical, gender issue backgrounds, as well as their voice and their choice as well. So if you're doing something that's trauma-informed, whether that be mental health, whether that be in the criminal justice system or education, these 6 principles should at least be what you're doing. You should be adhering to these 6 principles in every kind of step that you take through design and delivery. As we mentioned, in more recent years, the physical activity sector has taken a keen interest in becoming more trauma-informed, with that recognition that we see a lot of people who are affected by trauma accessing our interventions, our programs, our sports teams, and we've seen a really kind of growth in the more recent years of different modalities. So a lot of this is based in yoga, because of that kind of mind-body connection. But more recently, we've seen walking groups, running groups, weightlifting spaces, and even sports teams are actively trying to become more trauma-informed. And this is what we mean when we say it's an exciting space, because it means that a lot of people are kind of being more conscientious, being a lot more considerate of the effects of trauma, kind of looking at it and saying, so how can we actively work towards creating spaces that are more safe, more equitable, and more accessible for people who've experienced a range of different traumas. But as we kind of did this deep dive into trauma-informed approaches and trauma-informed physical activity, we identified kind of 2 key areas of concern, 2 kind of key areas that we felt we needed to address. The first one was that there was no general consensus to what it meant to be trauma-informed in this space. So by that we mean that when we talked to different organisations about their trauma-informed interventions, there was no kind of common thread. Right? We kind of got a lot of people saying a lot of different things about how they approach trauma-informed work. Now, the reason that causes a bit of, angst, a bit of grief, was that we kind of consider the fact that if we're not being trauma-informed, if we're not adhering to a set of principles or guidelines, then we really run the risk of doing more harm than good. Right? So if we say we're trauma-informed, but we don't actively take the steps to be trauma-informed, then we kind of have spaces where people are more at risk of becoming trauma-informed, triggered or upset in certain situations. The second point that we kind of considered was there was a lack of consideration about how trauma-informed approaches more generally are applied in physical activity settings. So the settings that we see trauma-informed approaches applied in more generally are things like mental health situations, criminal justice systems, where the body is there. Obviously, you have to kind of be there to engage with these systems, but we don't focus on it. Right? We don't pay specific attention to the body, and trauma is held in the body quite strongly, quite viscerally. So if we're working with the body in exercise spaces, we have to consider what that looks like. We have to consider what the implications are of working with the body so directly. Furthermore, exercise settings can re-traumatize or trigger people. They're very difficult to control, very unpredictable. So we actually have to be aware of, what things are going to happen in our environments, in our settings, that we may or may not be able to control, but we can kind of work with or against. So to address these two kind of key points then, we conducted a qualitative exploration to answer that question there. What does it mean to be trauma-informed in physical activity? So to answer that question, we spoke to 17 facilitators, all working in different kind of projects and contexts, all doing amazing work in the space, but doing so across, again, that breadth of delivery. So we had people that were CEOs and founders of their respective organisations, we had volunteer coordinators, we had personal trainers, we had coaches. So all these people with a breadth of knowledge, a breadth of experience, working across different projects to give us their insights or share their insights with us. Throughout the entire kind of data collection and the analysis, we maintained a real kind of focus or appreciation for the context and the experiences of people as well. So really trying to figure out, why has participant one spoken specifically about the body and the mind? Is it because of the people they work with, the trauma that they're exposed to, or is the kind of modality they use as well? So really trying to consider what kind of works for who and what context through this approach as well. So the result of this study was these 4 themes, and you can access this paper. It has been published, and you can read it if you're more interested in the 4 themes behind me there. But they kind of painted a picture of what it means to be trauma-informed in this space, and what I'll do is I'll give a bit of a brief overview of what this kind of told us. So the first step in kind of our design and then our delivery is we have to approach with considerate curiosity. So we have to consider why certain behaviours occur and approach those behaviours with communication. So an example I like to use, if we have a yoga program and we have somebody in there who seems anxious, maybe it's their first time, but also they're very focused on the doors and the windows and the exits. They're very focused on other people's kind of proximity to them, but also maybe they refuse to take their shoes off. We have to consider, well, what's going on there? What's going on for that individual in that moment? It might be that they want to escape, that kind of fight or flight response is active, and they need to be sure that they can do so if needs be. And that approach is the first step to meeting people where they are, so kind of acting in a way that is compassionate and empathetic, but also responsive, not reactive, responsive to behaviours we see, and therefore the needs of the individual in that time, in that space. And in practice, that might look like having a program, planned out, a session planned out, but actually if the person comes in and they're overwhelmed and they just need a moment to regulate and work on their breathing, give them that time, give them that space to kind of level themselves in that moment. Another theme that I found particularly interesting for this particular area was the looking at professional boundaries and scope of practice. And I thought this was really interesting because it reflected a bit of a concern from physical activity professionals, where the concern was, do we now have to become trauma experts or psychiatrists to fix trauma? And our respondents kind of said that's not the point. The point is that we have to work with people in this space to help them access physical activity. So we're not asking coaches and volunteers to become trauma specialists. We're not trying to get them to fix the individual in that moment. We're just getting them to help the person in that moment engage in exercise sessions. And if their needs become a bit out of our remit, if we need to kind of refer them on to more clinical support, housing support, employability support, then we can do that with trusted referral networks. All right, so we are able to connect with the people in the community and get people onto these other services. The final theme from this study was shared of experience, and this was a key theme across the entire PhD. For this particular chapter, a lot of our respondents talked about creating spaces where people feel less alienated, where people feel less alone. So the experience of trauma often leaves people feeling that they're othered, that they don't kind of relate to other people. So if we as practitioners and deliverers can create spaces where people think, I get to go and see people that connect to me, people that understand what I've been through, people that normalise my experiences, and I feel kind of at home almost, right? I feel a lot less alone in this environment. So these 4 themes kind of set the foundation for our kind of later chapters as well, kind of helps us understand what exactly we're looking for in literature, helps us understand what TIPA looks like in practice, but also were created with kind of the insights of the people that we spoke to. So again, a range of experience went into creating these, and a lot of insights were gained. So the next step, so now that we knew what TIPA looked like, we kind of started then looking at, what works for who and what context. So really looking at the resources, looking at research papers, programs that are out there, and trying to create an idea of, what works for who and what context to really pick apart the mechanisms that are active in trauma-informed physical activity. So I mentioned earlier on that the research approach we took was a realist approach, and the realist approach really focused on that bottom question there, what works for who and what context and why, but really kind of looking at the outcomes that we see, not taking them for face value. So if we see our programs have really good social outcomes, if we see that people feel more embodied, more relaxed, it's kind of saying that's great, but what's going on underneath those outcomes, kind of trying to figure out exactly what's happening in a particular context to have those outcomes, come into the fore. So context in realist research is absolutely essential. So we're considering what's going on around the program. So in this room, there is a context. There are specific contexts of individuals. It can be within the individual. It can be more broadly, things going on in society at the moment, which are going to affect the way we interact with certain resources. As I mentioned there, the realist approach looks at the outcomes, but the mechanisms that underpin them as well. So if we see people feeling a lot more comfortable, what's going on in our programs? What are we doing as instructors or deliverers? What are we doing as participants that creates that feeling of closeness and togetherness? And the realist theories that we created combined the context, the mechanism, the outcomes to really paint a picture of what was going on for the people that we looked at in terms of the programs as well. So kind of an example to hit that approach home. Let's say we've got a yoga program here in Loughborough. Let's say it's Hot Pod Yoga near the church. And we've got a very well-qualified instructor who does this session on a weekly basis. And we see that people feel a lot more embodied, right? They come to the sessions and they feel more mindful, they feel more connected, and they feel a lot more, mindful of who they are. We also see a really strong social group. So we see that people tend to get there 10, 15 minutes early, but then they also kind of stick around at the end as well, just to have a coffee, a chat, but to really kind of connect with each other outside of the session. And then we have good attendance. So let's say the session was about 20 people, we see 15 people, more of the same, kind of coming week in, week out, give or take a few people that maybe have other commitments as well. So when we look at this from the realist perspective, we say this is a good program, right? This is a very good program that's got good outcomes, and we want to see this elsewhere. Right? We like it so much that we think this has to work in every other context. So in that kind of headspace, we kind of take it to London. We say, right, we're going to employ another good instructor, and we're going to have the same kind of outcomes. So we do indeed see the participants feel more embodied, because again, we've got a really good instructor that knows what they're doing. So we see people feeling more mindful, more kind of connected to themselves. However, we see a poor social group. So we don't see the same kind of people, or don't see the same kind of patterns where people come early or leave later. People tend to drop their mats down, do the exercise, then go straight away. And we also see very poor attendance. So we don't see the same faces week in, week out. We struggle to get 10 out of 20 people turning up. So the realist approach would look at this situation and say we've got one program that works in location A or context A, but we're not getting the same thing in context B. So can anybody in the room or even online kind of tell us, or have a guess as what's going on, what's missing in London that's not in Loughborough, or what's there in London that's not in Loughborough? What are we missing in the second context? There's no right or wrong, just any idea.
Probably some kind of connection to actually make people come together and then feel like they can come back.
Yeah. Absolutely. So maybe the instructor doesn't create a space where people feel connected, or maybe there's not that kind of social group. And that could be the case that Loughborough's got a really strong student population. A lot of people kind of go together. Maybe they've got similar kind of timelines or schedules. But actually, if you're in London, it's a busy working kind of environment, then maybe that's not the same as well. Yeah. Anybody else?
We've got loads online.
Oh, bro.
So online's been suggested the instructor, belonging, transportation might be difficult or longer, people rush off because of the length of travel time, the environment, does it allow space to be sociable afterwards, people rushing in and out, and a supportive culture.
Perfect. So yeah, absolutely all those things come into it, and they can be contextual, they can be mechanistic, there can be things in the intervention as well. So if your yoga program doesn't have somewhere you can sit before and afterwards, then you're less likely to do that. So that's what the realist approach tries to do, tries to capture things that help us become, kind of see the outcomes that we see, but also understand the things that are missing in these programs as well. Thank you very much. So we kind of did that same activity a bit of a bigger scale, so I think we had about 30,000 resources for this step, and these were all resources that we took into account to create a set of program theories. So again, trying to figure out what works for who and what context and why. So for this particular chapter, so this is the second chapter in the thesis, we looked at research papers. So these were all kinds of papers, qualitative papers, RCTs, longitudinal studies, all papers that were quite relevant, but also provide a really good richness to our kind of research question. We had a lot of grey literature as well, so I think about 60 pieces of grey literature went into the final theories, and these were, television and film, podcasts, music, magazine articles, but also quite a nice thing to see was that we had a lot of early career researchers doing theses in this area. So some of them looking at yoga for physical activity, for trauma and mental health, or looking at trauma-informed activity as a whole. Very fortunate to have about 10 stakeholders, all of whom kind of provided us some insight into our theory development. So the initial kind of stages, these stakeholders provided us with some resources to identify and kind of go chase up. As we kind of progressed through the process, this was all iterative, so it wasn't very linear, it kind of went in iterative steps. So these stakeholders helped us kind of refine the things that we were seeing. So if we read a study and a piece of grey literature that said, we actually think that, like we're saying, there's no kind of connection in certain areas, we asked our stakeholders and said, is that the case? Do you think that's what's missing? Is there anything else at play there? And stakeholders were people that experience trauma, people that work in academia, people that work with charities and organisations, so quite a nice mixture of people there as well. In this stage, and of course across our entire thesis, we had a very active person with lived experience, who for the purpose of the presentation I'll call Sharon. And Sharon has experienced mental health difficulties and trauma, and was absolutely essential to kind of some theory refinement, helping us connect the dots where maybe us as a research team couldn't connect those dots, or maybe where things just weren't there for us to witness. So Sharon's role was kind of to help us connect different kind of resources and give us an added layer of nuance. So if we miss something in terms of the experience of people with mental health difficulties, Sharon kind of say, well, actually for me, these are the things that work. For me, these are the things that make it difficult to engage in physical activity. So sadly, Sharon can't be here with us today, but definitely a key part of the research process. So we put all those resources together, and they gave us a bit of an idea of what works for who, in what context and why, and they were the initial kind of program theories where we combined our contexts, our mechanisms across a range of different resources. So I think in the end there's about 100 different resources went into building these program theories, and I was going to go through all of them, there was about 18, but I thought I'd give you them in clusters instead. So of the 18 theories, we had about 2 or 3 looked specifically at interoception. So these tended to use things like yoga, trauma-sensitive mindfulness, tai chi and dance. So really looking at the body as the key kind of thing in that intervention, work on the body, work on interoception and feeling. And the outcomes that we saw with these particular interventions was, reduced PTSD symptoms, more kind of connectedness to the body, but also some of those social outcomes as well, people feeling more connected to each other in those settings. The second cluster of theories we had were the reclamation of self. This was quite a nice collection of theories because it looks at things like choice, so making sure that we gave people options of how to opt in and opt out, how to engage, whether or not they engage at all. Doing physical activity to, kind of feel better, but not from a mental health lens, but from a lens of, I just want to exercise as an exerciser, as opposed to because I've got a diagnosis. And also kind of giving people that time to kind of be themselves as well. So a lot of the research suggested that certain populations experience a range of different kind of demands in their lives. So physical activity acted like an hour in the week where they could just be themselves and enjoy something for themselves. They weren't a carer, they weren't a parent, they weren't somebody trying to overcome an addiction. They were just somebody in that space exercising as well. The importance of socialising and shared lived experience. So again, this theme came up again in this chapter here. But for these theories, it was about checking in with people. It was about kind of connecting with people, especially if we can relate to them at some level. So if we had similar life experiences, similar kind of demographics, we were in the kind of same areas of life, then these theories held true there as well. And the core outcome of this was more social capital, more kind of social resources too. And finally, we had a couple of theories that looked at the importance of deliverer. So deliverer characteristics, behaviours, these came to the fore in these theories as well, whereby if we related to the coach or the deliverer, we were more likely to engage, but also if the deliverer did the physical activity with us, so maybe not watching us, but they actually engaged with us, we felt a lot closer to them, and we kind of balanced out those power dynamics as well. So they were the kind of core theories that we saw then. So as I said, we had about 18 theories that we kind of cultivated across the data resources that we got, and they were strong. You know, they were very informed by stakeholder insights, lived experience, resources in literature and grey literature. But as a research team, we still thought they were a bit abstract. They still kind of missed a lot of the nuances that we pick up in real life. So the next step for us was to kind of take those 18 theories and say, how can we test these against real life situations and settings? How can we actually understand if they hold true in the real world? So to do that, we conducted a case study, study project even for theory refinement. We went to 3 different organisations and tried to test our theories against what they were doing. And this was a really good opportunity to go out there and try and test our theories and to see how well the things that we captured, you know, in our discussions, in our research papers, actually held true in the real world. And we had the pleasure of working with these 3 organisations, all of whom are doing amazing work in this space, all of whom are doing this amazing work with specific populations. As you read a bit more about who they are and what they do, I'll let you know what they allowed us to do in terms of their programme. So for about 8 months, from 2024 to 2025, I accessed these programmes, so I went down to see them, or went through to see them 9 times, so 3 times each site, and I engaged in physical activity alongside participants and interviewed people, but also just observed how they kind of ran their programmes and how they did what they do. And what I said to them at every kind of visit is that we aren't putting a lens on you, we aren't testing you, we're actually having you as a lens to test our theories, right? It was an opportunity for us to look at our theories and say, how well do they actually hold up in the real world? How well do these theories actually apply to the real people that are living through these experiences here in the UK? So to help us refine these theories, to help us kind of do this stage, we collected a lot of data, yes again. So this time around, got 17 hours of interviews and focus groups, and these were with volunteers, with participants, with facilitators and providers, and these were opportunities to ask them, you know, how well does this theory hold true in your environment? And that was an opportunity for them to say, look, that theory is correct, so that sounds good, that theory is not quite right, have you considered these other aspects, or that theory is completely wrong, you've missed the point of what we do here. And that approach is very, very useful, very enjoyable, because that provides us that kind of backdrop to say, look, what are we doing right with our theories, and what do we need to change as well? So really kind of refined in terms of our lenses. We did 77 hours of physical activity and observation, so really just getting stuck in, so playing football, badminton, trying to keep up with the young people at the running charity, but also observations to kind of really pick up those nuanced conversations, those kind of connections that we see in terms of, you know, people checking in with each other mid-session, people kind of feeling more mindful, people feeling more connected, and that provided us a good opportunity to really connect with people at that level. The bottom 2 bits of data collection, so the written notes and the order reflections, helps us then connect the dots that we were kind of seeing. So if we engaged in a football session and then we went back to our theories and we said, okay, so that session applied really well to theories 3 and 4, the reflections helps us say, so what's going on there? What kind of things are we picking up in the moment that we might not be able to note down, stuff like that. So these 2 steps really help with objectivity. They helped us with kind of coming back to the research team and connecting and saying, look, this is what I did and this is how it made me feel, or how I felt in that moment. What does that tell us about the theories that we've generated? What does that tell us about what's going on there? And again, we connected with Sharon throughout this process to kind of pick up the things that we maybe were missing in those kind of moments of data collection, to really make sure our theories are refined and rooted in personal connection and lived experience. So all that work set us to our final programme theories, and our final programme theories reflected the conceptualisation of TIPA, so that first step, those 4 themes. It reflected the programme theories created in that second step, so all those resources and those theories, but also the final step there that I've talked about, the case studies, where we refine the programme theories through kind of in-person, real-life connection as well. As I mentioned before, the programme theories do kind of try and combine context, mechanism and outcome, so I'll be talking to you about them in the if, then, because statements, where if is the context, then is the outcome, and because is the mechanism that underpins it. So the first theory, altogether. The first theory that we kind of refined was the importance of checking in, so turning small talk into big conversations. So if people feel more stigmatised and dismissed, but they engage in informal check-ins and conversations, then they become more interested in connecting with others and form meaningful relationships. The mechanism behind that is that people feel a lot safer to do these things. So for our participants, a lot of them interact with the world through, psychiatric meetings, through kind of discussions with, law enforcement. These conversations aren't always positive. These conversations often leave them feeling dismissed, belittled, but also they come away from these conversations feeling quite small. So if we have a situation where the coaches check in on you, and it's not massive kind of conversations, it's how are you? You were here last week, is everything okay? The people said to us that they felt a lot safer, they felt more welcome and able to open up on things that matter to them. In particular, that kind of feeling of, not making a session and people just checking in on you the next week, a lot of participants enjoyed that. That was something that really meant a lot to them, especially through more depressive kind of symptoms or timeframes. The next one was consistency in delivery, which led to better adherence and connection. So if people's lives are full of uncertainty and unpredictability, so for example, if you're experiencing homelessness and you're not sure where your next meal is going to come from or where you're next going to be resting, but also maybe if you're experiencing refugeeism and your kind of status here in the country or wherever you are is in the air a lot of the time. But you have a session that's delivered consistently, so the same time, same place, same people, to some extent the same structure as well, kind of following that kind of warm-up, bulk of it, cool-down. Then people felt a lot less anxious about attending because they knew what to expect, and they built stronger emotional bonds with deliverers. So having the same people kind of there allowed them to build that rapport with people, to kind of connect with people, and to kind of share that kind of schema, that sort of foundation to form positive relationships. And the mechanism there being that continuity and predictability. So having something in your week that you can look forward to was a key kind of thing in this theory. We saw that in terms of if you have a session on a Monday and a Thursday, people anchor their weeks around that. Right, I need to do my shopping, so I'll do it before that session, or I'll do everything else between those two sessions. A really nice outcome that's not on there, but that was kind of longer term for this theory, was that once people had a session maybe on a Wednesday, they then began to enact more positive life behaviour. So if you've got a session, maybe it's a running session or a table tennis session on a Wednesday, you're less likely to drink alcohol on the Tuesday, you're less likely to misuse substances on the Tuesday, but you're also more likely to eat healthier on the Wednesday because your coaches or something somewhere has told you that eating healthier food improves your kind of recovery. So we saw these outcomes kind of emerging. Obviously with longer term kind of research we could kind of observe them a little better, but really nice indicator there of the impacts of physical activity for other people's kind of lives there as well. Regaining control and empowerment through choice. So often trauma leaves people feeling they have little choice or little control over their lives. And this is particularly prevalent for or pertinent for people who maybe are in relationships or situations that take a lot of choice away from them, abusive relationships in particular. But TIPA provides them with choices over how, when or where they engage. So if it's the Sport in Mind who deliver arranged sessions across the week, being able to pick which sessions you go to, which sessions you don't go to is absolutely paramount. For the running charity, kind of choosing the pace that you run at or whether you run at all was key as well, and just letting the coaches let you take your kind of set your pace. Participants then develop a sense of control over their own healing, and they feel a sense of autonomy. So again, something that we saw with this particular theory was that people made more choices in sessions. So in badminton, the kind of shot you take, and the good thing with physical activity is that you don't get punished for those kind of mistakes. So if you make the wrong choice in physical activity, you can try again. So that's the key kind of thing that we saw here, that people can make choices, take risks, positive risks, without kind of negative consequences. And again, a longer term outcome that we heard about was that people began to make other positive choices in their lives. So people started making choices about what kind of jobs to go for, what kind of relationships to form, but also what kind of behaviours to enact outside of that situation. So again, physical activity as the base for these kind of outcomes, but then kind of seeing those transcend across different areas of their lives as well. The final one I'll talk about today was praise and encouragement as building blocks for self-efficacy. So if trauma leaves people feeling they're not good at anything in their lives, but they receive encouragement from others, then their self-efficacy to perform actions increases because they feel recognised and supported by others in TIPA interventions. So this particular theory was particularly strong for individuals who experienced abusive relationships, domestic violence, where their kind of self-worth has been eroded and kind of chipped away at over time. So when they come to the sessions and they get people who say to them, look, well done for that shot, good thing that you tried, or even, well done for turning up, they began to find they actually are good at something, or they are good inherently. So for one of our participants, he said that over 15 or 20 years of a less than healthy relationship, the physical activity program was the first place in a long time that he felt he was good at something. So really set that kind of foundation of, I am not worthless, I can do something, and I can be appreciated for that as well. So appreciating, yes, successes, but also efforts in that kind of same space as well. So that's our kind of theories there, and we can kind of go back over those if anybody has any questions. But the recommendations for practice off the back of those theories are these. So co-design with participants wherever possible. So really shifting away from doing things to and for people and working with them. So kind of collaborating wherever possible. Prioritising safety, consistency and autonomy. So again, looking at the choices that we provide people or giving people the space to take those choices up. And being there consistently for people. So being reliable and being there when they need you. And a lot of times in the literature and in what we collected, we kind of found that people found these bonds as unconditional support, right? They looked at their coaches, their facilitators as people that they could rely on in times of need, whether that was trauma, physical activity, or a bit more life focused. Building informal social spaces, just having spaces before and after, even within sessions, where people can connect with each other, can be absolutely massive, because people tend to go for the social element of physical activity. Something we found throughout all the kind of chapters, that social element of physical activity is massive, super important. And finally, reframing physical activity as enjoyment and not therapy, enjoyment, well-being and not therapy. So kind of shifting away from, you're here because you're mental health and that's all we're going to do today. We're going to have conversations about mental health, but just kind of delivering exercise for people that want to exercise. And a key kind of thing that we noticed early on was that when we went to these programs, there was no discussion of mental health. Maybe you can check in, you can talk about that if you want, but there's never a kind of pressure to talk about your mental health in these settings, and a lot of participants really valued that kind of approach to say, I'm just here to exercise, and I can talk about mental health if I need to, if I want to. If I don't, then I can just come here and, play some badminton, play some tennis, or just go for a walk. A few kind of research implications then. So what we've done with the thesis and the work so far is that we've kind of created a set of guiding principles and conceptualized TIPA. So now we kind of know what we're looking for when we look at trauma-informed physical activity. If we're looking to collect certain programs, we're looking to develop certain things, we now have a better idea of what that actually looks like. We have now a common thread or a general consensus. We have a better understanding of what TIPA is, how it works, what it works for, and what context in particular. And that's particularly good for people that are researching this area, and there's a lot of people researching this area, some amazing work out there already. But also for practitioners who are trying to implement these principles, and practitioners being your coaches, your volunteers, your personal trainers, your policy makers. So now we have a nice kind of idea of what works. And off the back of that, we've got a good set of theories and recommendations that people can adopt and use, and kind of have those involved in their kind of design and delivery as well. So across the kind of thesis, these are the key things that we've put together. Some next steps for us then. So the thesis chapter is in the process of being published, and one paper is already out there. So that's a qualitative exploration, which I talked about briefly, though, the 4 themes. We're working to ensure findings are applied to different areas, so again, looking at different kind of contexts in which these findings are most applicable, and really welcoming those conversations where people say, look, that theory, it makes sense, and I've tried it, but it doesn't quite work for where I am, and trying to figure out why that might be. Maybe we've not captured your particular context, or maybe we need to think about certain things that maybe might not be there in terms of the mechanisms that you're implementing. And then some resources from Mind, which I'll let Hayley talk to you a lot more about, but yeah. So before I finish off, I just want to say a massive thank you to ASICS, who obviously helped fund the research, to all of our participants for giving us their time. It is my PhD, but it's actually a combination of a lot of brilliant stories, a lot of brilliant people doing this work, and a lot of people also accessing these services. So a massive thank you to them. Thank you to my supervisors again for all your support across the 3.5 years, for all of you here today, to Esther and Naomi for helping us kind of be here today. The logistical side of this isn't easy, and for Catherine, who's put together the report that you've all seen today so far, and Kartik as well for your efforts too. The Mind Physical Activity team, each and every one of you have also helped us over the last 3.5 years, so very grateful for that too.